excited to welcome the facilitator for our panel discussion today. Kenya Smith is with us. Kenya has over 16 years of experience in marketing, solutioning, R&D, consulting, training, and support in the healthcare industry. She is a current Doctor of Business student at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, and her research interests are in the areas of technology and solution integration. Kenya, what a pleasure to have you with us. We are excited to hear this discussion about how we innovate the patient journey. So thank you so much for you and the panel to share your expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you for that warm welcome. So as Jose mentioned, today we're going to be discussing the automation of patient journey and the impact that it's having on the healthcare industry. Today with me, I would like to go ahead and introduce my panelists. First up, we have Matt Williams. Matt is the lead healthcare business development manager at Abbey. Welcome, Matt. Next, we have Duff Glaser. Duff is the Senior Director, Healthcare Lead Americas at Blue Prism. Welcome, Duff. And last but not least, we have Paul Buonopane. Paul is our performance improvement expert at Abbey. Welcome, guys. So why don't we just take a couple of minutes to allow you guys to introduce yourself to the audience. And we'll kind of start with Matt, Duff, and then we'll go to Paul. And then we'll jump right into our presentation. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Hi, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be spending this morning with you all. My name is Matt Williams. I am the business development representative at Abbey for our healthcare industry. Spent a number of my years getting started in healthcare IT, working for Cerner, leading EHR implementations and doing business development, solving customers' problems. I'm excited to be bringing that experience working in the healthcare IT space over to Abbey.
Thank you, Matt. Duff? Duff, we're not able to hear your audio.
Good morning, everybody. This is Duff. You all can hear me now. I am a 35-year healthcare participant. I say participant because I started back in the mergers and acquisition days of Citicorp and have moved through the clinical and operational aspects of a hospital. I have a degree both in public health and a master's in business administration. So I bring that healthcare and business acumen together from an enterprise perspective, and I look forward to being a participant in today's presentation.
Thank you, Duff. And we are hearing a little bit of feedback from your end, but hopefully we can get that adjusted. All right, thank you, Duff. And Paul?
Good morning, everyone. Paul Buonopane, 20 years in healthcare, started my career at Partners Healthcare in Boston, then moved on to Deloitte for 10 years, where I was doing strategy and operations. Six Sigma Black Belt, done a ton in performance improvement. Looking forward to the conversation today.
All right, thanks, Paul. So why don't we jump right in, guys? All right, so we know typically the back office success and automation has been a depth and breadth of care optimization using RPA and process mining. Now, there has been a transition of focus for healthcare over the last few years, and really COVID has accelerated that. So I wanted to first turn it over to Duff to kind of discuss how has the resurgence of telehealth impacted the patient journey?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Kenya. I think one of the things that you are going to see in the healthcare industry today is that explosive advent of telehealth. We have seen through the COVID experience that patients have had a hard time coming back to the hospital. There's a fear involved. There's a for lack of reasoning, there's a lack of trust in hospitals, and I can tell you from a personal standpoint, my wife's a doctor, that the hospitals are safe. They're doing everything in the world to make sure that they can take care of their patients. But now with the reimbursements, telehealth that CMMS has approved, you're seeing hospitals and large private practices roll out telehealth and assign individuals. What this means is that more and more people are going to be using that virtual door, that portal, to be able to access their healthcare. And at that point, we have an opportunity now to use digital workers, automation, to really hold the hand of the patient and walk them through all of the steps that are defined in the patient journey, everywhere from pre-registration to making sure that your insurances are approved so your services are paid for, all the way through claims adjudication and care delivery. And really, that's where the industry is going now, is how can we make sure that the patient journey is as satisfactory as possible. And when we talk about satisfaction in healthcare, we're talking about patient outcomes, patient safety, and patient satisfaction, making sure that they're satisfied, because that affects the HEDIS scores, which affects the NCQA reporting, which ultimately is reflected in your reimbursements. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And, you know, it's actually a good segue into the next question. You talked a lot about patient engagement. I'm going to go ahead and share a couple of slides with the audience. But, Jeff, if you could kind of share with us, what are some strategies for leveraging that patient journey mapping to improve patient experience that you mentioned in your first?
Sure. This is a fantastic slide to help people visualize, you know, what does that patient journey meeting at that virtual door actually mean? And the bottom line is that the patient has so many things to do. And if we can offload their to-dos and give them to a digital worker who can help coordinate their care, and really that's what it comes down to. It's the coordination of all of the steps. Now, RPA, as it was known about automating processes primarily in the back office around revenue cycle, et cetera, and making sure that you reduce the claims, denials, and help in the posting of that. What Blue Prism does with our partner is we provide you with a storyboard of automations. We provide our customers and our partners the ability to help organizations map and identify so they can be up and running fast, and also use other technologies such as FlexiCapture and Timeline to help process OCR needs, to help process and identify other processes that need to be connected, because we're no longer just automating a process, we're automating a full workflow, and that is what helps organizations transform and become sustainable. It's the automation of workflows that allow the patient to move seamlessly through their journey and their engagement to receive the best, safest, and most satisfying care.
If I could jump in, I have something to add there. So patient journey mapping, right, I think is extremely important. And some of the techniques I have seen healthcare organizations use is maybe even look at subpopulations of their patients. So thinking like patients who are high risk, maybe they have congestive heart failure. Those are historically very high risk patient populations that you want to make sure that you are providing care efficiently to. So things like mapping their patient journey, seeing how they're moving through the health system, and looking at opportunities for improvement. So a great opportunity that we've seen by mapping that journey with something like process intelligence is to go in and identify, are we getting these patients scheduled for their follow-up visits, right? And that's something that can be done before they ever get discharged. So at that point of discharge order, let's go ahead and trigger that scheduling. Let's get that patient scheduled for that outpatient visit. Let's look if they need transportation arranged. Maybe they can't provide that themselves. We can do all of that ahead of time to make sure that they're getting the care that they need after they leave the hospital. And I think that's the biggest impact with that patient journey mapping, is seeing the end-to-end process, seeing what those outcomes are, and identifying where are those potential pitfalls that are causing lapses in care.
And just as Paul, just to add to that, you can finally get into preferences, right? So we talk a lot about journey, but what's the preference of that journey? You know, as a patient, we're all patients at one point in our lives. Think about your experience and how you're engaged and all the things that go through your mind during a doctor visit, the financial liability, where I'm gonna park. So how do we really get at those preferences to make that journey more successful? And to Duff's point, how can we automate some of that to take away that pressure?
Oh yeah, all great examples. And you know, the slide we have in front of us, obviously we've highlighted at least 30 steps to automate that patient journey, but we know that there's probably hundreds out there. So that's, great feedback, you guys. And obviously it's we know it's a huge challenge for healthcare organizations.
Yeah, Kenya, if I may, what we've done from a process mining standpoint with Abby in identifying those 30 and right through the patient journey as well as patient engagement, we've identified with them over 100 processes. So organizations should not be afraid to embark on a digital pathway journey using automation, because the value that an Abby and a Blue Prism bring is we're going to put together that plate that you're going to eat off of. It's going to have everything on it. And that way we can ensure success, not just for the organization, but also for the patient. And that's what's key.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Doug, Matt, and Paul. All right, so we learned the importance of, the role of automation and during the patient journey. So I wanted to switch gears a bit, and let's now talk about process mining and intelligence and all of the different types of intelligence tools that can be utilized during that patient journey. So with that, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to Paul and Matt. So Paul, and we'll ask you to kick this off first. So Paul, can you tell us, why is process mining and intelligent tools important, especially for healthcare organizations?
So before we get into, excuse me, before we get into the tools, let's talk about DMAIC. If you look at the history of healthcare, they've adopted a lot of best practices from other industries. And in those other industries, they've used Six Sigma. So in healthcare, there's a big lean initiative that's happened over the last 10 years. So if you look at the diagram in front of you, most people have been trained in DMAIC, which is to define the problem, measure it, analyze it, improve it, and control. And within that, we've launched these big programs and gone in and tried to optimize as well as automate processes to get ROI. Now, the challenge is we never had the tools to do that. So if you think of the old Six Sigma as being six, I think what process mining tools allow us to do is to get to the 7 Sigma and do more or less. And I think Matt can essentially talk about some of the ways we do that using some of these tools. Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So Paul, like you mentioned, DMAIC is a great methodology. It's having a proven track record. I think what we want to be able to do is accelerate that, right? So there's a lot of opportunity to use technology to enhance, much like how we're using, RPA to automate different processes and enhancing the ability of providers to deliver care and for office personnel to do the work faster. Process mining is helping those process improvement initiatives really accelerate. So the great thing is we have a lot of data at our disposal within the EMR, within your ERP systems. And what we can actually do is take that data and reconstruct the process exactly how it happened. So no more are the old days of sitting, going in, doing interviews, doing time and motion studies, trying to figure out what is my process. We can actually pull data from those core systems and reconstruct them exactly how they happened. So for example, if we wanted to map out the process from the ED, we can actually take data from your EMR, from your ERP, connect it all together with those date and timestamps. So every time you do something within these core systems, unfortunately, kind of like Big Brother, it's actually tracking when you did it and who did it. So by taking those date and timestamps, you put them together chronologically, and now you've got your end-to-end process. And that's really the value of what process mining is delivering. It's an objective view into what your processes are, and it's also a very fast view into what your processes are. So we're capturing all the different variations that those processes can have that you would never get by just simply doing interviews with individuals and trying to do it in the manual approaches like walking the wall or trying to put together a nice video.
And just to give you an example of that, if you had to scale it, imagine you had 4,000 schedules across your entire health system that have some pockets of centralized and decentralization of how they schedule. If I said to you, go map out and baseline how long it takes them to schedule, how many times they touch the account, how much it costs, probably take you a good year. We can do that in an hour with these tools, and that's the differentiator. because you can start focusing on strategic design versus transactional design. And Matt,
so
this is, I think, a good example.
Yeah, so if you look at your screen here, right, on the left, you've got your quote unquote traditional approaches of maybe mapping the patient journey, right? So you get in a room with some resources, all your key stakeholders, and you walk through what are all those different decision points in that particular process. And you probably come out with a nice Visio like the one on the left. The challenge is your process is actually more like the diagram on the right. There's a lot of variations. You can see all the different ways that process might go. And this is actually a real life example, I believe, of the ED. So you can see patients are moving through in a lot of different ways. So if you think about, I'm trying to automate a specific piece of this process. Well, if I try and automate maybe my happy path, maybe that only gets me, 40% improvement because I only captured 40% of the patients moving through in that particular way. What we have to account for is all the different variations. So not only do we want to automate, but maybe we want to start standardizing our processes so that we get the most out of our automation investments. So that's really the key difference here is getting a more objective view, a scientific view of our processes so that we can apply the right improvement initiative to solving those particular problems.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt and Paul. Great information. So I want to switch gears a little bit and kind of go back to what we talked about a little bit earlier about automation. And I'm wondering if you guys can maybe give us some customer stories, kind of what you're hearing from the industry around what are the prime areas for automation? And I'm going to open that up and ask that, all of the panelists provide their feedback that they're hearing directly from their customers. So why don't we go ahead and start with Paul?
So I'm hearing a lot about I want to move to digital and move away from as much manual processes. So a lot of our clients and what the industry has been discussing is how do I do that? I've cut my resources by 50% or 40% because of COVID. I don't have the people to look at digital processes. So just, step one, how do people access your system? And, process mining tools allow you to basically create that blueprint. And once you create that blueprint, you can finally see, are people using my portal? Do I want to put more dollars and capital in that portal? Do I want to put some automations around that portal? Or are people using my call center? So should I start thinking about using virtual assistants? So it's really starting with a hypothesis and trying to understand where they want to make those improvements and then automations. So we're seeing a lot of our clients doing a lot of stuff in the scheduling space. And we had one actually that just wanted to understand and baseline their schedulers. So we used our process mining tools to understand if they were just following the end-to-end policies that were in place. And what we find is what we think is happening and what actually is happening are two different stories. So I think in the access space, we're seeing a lot of attention, improvement, and automation.
And if I could elaborate on that one. So in that particular use case, what's really interesting is when we map those end-to-end processes, not only do we see some of the people behavior, but we see some of the system actions as well. So we all know when we go out and we implement, our Epic EMR or Cerner EMR, there's a lot of different components that go into that, and we don't always configure it correctly. But some of those breaks are very difficult to find. So when we map that the front end process, we're looking at things like, checking in the patient, scheduling the patient, and also running those eligibility checks. Are they capturing all the information? So within that, we're actually seeing some of those system actions that are happening behind the scenes. And in that particular use case, what we saw is there was actually a break in their eligibility system. So it was running too many eligibility checks. And we all know that these eligibility checks cost organizations money. So when you have these big batch jobs that are running for a large health system, seeing thousands of patients a day, those little pings are going to really add up. So we were seeing thousands and thousands of pings, sometimes 300 pings per patient visit, which is costing the organizations millions of dollars. So it's an opportunity to fix that, just a simple break fix, and make sure that the system is optimized, or renegotiate opportunities with their vendor to see if they can get a more advantageous contract. So a lot of really key things come out of just understanding what my process is to begin with.
Yeah, and Matt and Paul, you guys were just spot on. If I can share a couple of real-world discussions over the past several days with some of our customers, there are two areas that providers are really looking for us to help them identify A, cost takeout, or B, to help drive revenue or save revenue. In both of those circumstances, you start seeing the expansion of functionality that enterprise automation brings to an organization. In cost takeout, we're in conversations today with multiple providers around supply chain optimization, facilities management optimization, enterprise asset optimization. And this really goes to how we can look at these work-intensive workflows and bring automation to value. And then when we go to the revenue side of the general ledger, hospitals have a huge problem, and it's called leakage. And about 10% of their annual revenue is lost to leakage on an annual basis. And what leakage is patients leaving the healthcare network and going to another provider for their services. The average patient is worth about $600,000 in their lifespan to a hospital. So if you think about losing 10% of your revenue on an annual basis to patients leaving the network, if you're a $3 billion hospital and you're losing 10% of your revenue on an annual basis, that is critical. So we have an opportunity to increase patient satisfaction and patient safety, which keeps patients using the same network, as well as quality of care. And the ability for digital workers automation to bring the right information into the right hands for the right diagnosis and treatment is critical into reducing leakage. And so we look, and I can talk about hospitals all day long that are doing this. We're not talking about the art of possible. We're talking about the art of what is being done today. So if you're a healthcare organization that is $200 million in revenue, or you're a healthcare operation that's $3 billion in revenue, we all have the same problems. We all are challenged by making sure that we focus on the patient correctly, we focus on automating the workflows, and we focus on those outcomes. So I hope that helps.
It does. And I think everyone has done a fantastic job with kind of laying that foundation and providing several use case examples of automation. Now, one question I know we hear a lot, if I'm in healthcare organization and I'm interested in implementing automation in my healthcare, in my settings, what would be the first step? And that question's to all.
Yeah, if I may, then I'll turn it over to my partners. I think the first thing is understanding your organization from a cadence and a governance standpoint, and really embracing what I would call a business automation model. Again, if you embrace that business automation model, you're going to get different stakeholders throughout your organization to buy into the outcomes that you want. And then along with partners such as Abby, in our case, they're going to be able to facilitate technologies and workflows to help you set up that center of excellence that is committed to by all the different stakeholders in your organization. And then once that's done, we can bring in the storyboards and really show how enterprise automation will really transform and help your organization. And I'll turn it over to Paul and Matt for their opinions.
Yeah, I think just starting with just giving visibility into process, right? And using data. So before you assemble a team and get 30 people in a room, let's use data to see how that organization is actually operating. So if we look at the supply chain, for example, there's a lot of tech in healthcare right now. There's a lot of process mining vendors, but procure to pay is not the only process that runs the health system. It goes beyond that, believe it or not. You buy the hip implant, and then at some point you have to store that implant in the materials management system. And then from there, it goes into the operating room. There's a whole team that's put together to understand what's happening with that patient and what supplies they're going to use. And from that journey, you move into charging and revenue integrity. And then eventually you put that in your GL, and then at some point you see your money in the bank. That entire process is very componentized in health systems because there's a lot involved. With data, we can show you that whole process. We can show you product standardization. We can show you physician behavior. But more importantly, for the first time, Abby can show you the true cost of a supply. No one can do that. And if someone wants to challenge us to that, I'd happy to have that conversation. Because integration is just as important as an EHR system. So we need to start looking at all these integration systems and where we can improve. And there's a ton of automation in the middle where people are passing reports and papers back and forth. So Matt, anything else on that?
Yeah, I think you guys did a great job. So yeah, if I could just reiterate, I think like Duff said, having governance is absolutely fantastic, right? We know where the data lives, and having the resources that can go help pull that information with the use cases we've already defined, we can really hit the ground running. So within a couple hours, we're able to pull that information, tell you what your processes are, and begin that conversation with all your stakeholders. So what we feel like is really impactful is instead of getting in kind of a room and just brainstorming use cases or opportunities for improvement from scratch, how much more impactful would it be if you actually had your processes already laid out so that you can have a more informative conversation about where you think the opportunities are. You can start with an objective view and start talking about where they think they can improve, because you're never going to be able to replace all the information and all the great insights that the stakeholders who live this work day in and day out are going to be able to provide. But showing them what their processes are today is going to just lend itself to such more insightful thoughts about where we can make improvements, where we can make automations, and where we can simply just kind of standardize our processes. So I think it's a combination of everything that we've talked about so far.
Great, awesome, thanks guys. So also one other thing I'd like to hit on, I know that from the industry, there's this misnomer around, barriers of implementing automation. And I really wanted to make sure that before we end or wrap this session, we talk about this as a team so that, basically you guys have the opportunity to provide, again, some use cases from your customers who basically had maybe the same concerns with implementing around, kind of the cost or security concerns, or, I'm going to have to train additional IT staff for this. So if we could just spend a couple of minutes kind of discussing that again, as from all of the panelists, to provide some examples how other customers kind of attack those barriers. So we'll start with Matt.
Sure. So I think the term that I always like to use is data doesn't lie, right? So one of the biggest challenges we tend to see is what kind of value am I going to get from this improvement? What kind of value am I going to get from my automation? So by looking at our process and getting that objective view, we can actually tell you exactly what that value is going to be, because every step in the process is going to have a cost to it. So if I eliminate certain steps or I automate a certain, between certain steps, you're going to see either time or money savings within that process. So we've done things like looking at our ED process to see where we can make improvements. So things like physician over-ordering behaviors, where they're over-ordering certain tests. We're able to assign cost to those particular elements and tell you exactly what it would be by fixing that behavior. And the other example, which I gave you earlier, was looking at some of those system actions that are happening too often, or looking at the scheduling behavior and seeing how much it's costing us to not schedule that patient or what have you. So all of those things we can actually assign cost, and you can actually bring that to your leadership and say, this is exactly how much it's going to cost our organization because of the data that we have within our system. So I think it really helps to have that data-driven business case to begin with.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is Jeff. So Matt, you're spot on about the business case, and let me share with you a real world. Mass General Brigham, one of our largest healthcare customers, they started slow in the back office. They now have over, I think it's up to 40 digital workers working from an enterprise standpoint, all the way from back office to clinical. And what they did is, as they rolled out their automations, they actually made it part of their employee base because their automations became their third employee base. So they had full-time employees, part-time employees, and then digital workers. And what was critical about that is they had a steering committee, and then they had their different lines of businesses. And they incorporated us into presentations and results around the different proof of concepts that we did to automate areas in HR, areas in supply chain, areas in finance, areas in ambulatory care, etc. And in doing so, by presenting to the steering committee, we had buy-in all the time. They also did things like they named their bots. They had birthday parties for their bots. They do things that are very inclusive for the whole organization because they're treating their bots, quote unquote, like humans because they're working and they're producing. And what this inclusiveness did was it created buy-in across the enterprise because they could document that Betty bot who was doing something in HR around clinical licensing and credentialing has saved the organization $600,000. And all of a sudden, Betty Bot's a hero because they saved $600,000. And then there are other bots that they're using to insource. So when they outsource services to a third party, they're now using automation to bring that into house and automate, which is saving them anywhere from $400,000 to $600,000 per bot. So this is the way that you can identify challenges, but then also address them and make it more inclusive. So the bot is part of the organization. The digital worker is a productive employee. I hope that helps.
And if I could actually piggyback on that, I think one of the, so we kind of talked about barriers of entry, but how about, reaching that plateau? How do we blast past that plateau? And one of the things that we want to look at is value realization. Right? Once we've done our initial initiative, if we're just getting started, how do I prove out that I provided the value that I said I was going to? Right? And if we can prove that, if we can show data that says we were able to save the money, we're able to reduce the time to do certain actions, we can actually take that back to our leadership and say, hey, look, we've actually done this. We told you we're going to do it. We did it. Let's go out and do more things. So by having that data to tell you exactly what value you realize, that's just going to give you more and more ammunition to go back and do other initiatives that you want to go tackle.
And a good example, if you had, 5,000 patients come into an ED in 1 month, and out of those 5,000, let's say 10% had chest pains. How many of those patients scheduled a cardiology follow-up appointment, right? And how many ended up back in the ED a week later? You can't see that, with traditional tools. Abby timeline, when we talk about the patient journey, we can put that together to show you what patients came back. But more importantly, we can start to think about automation. So when a patient has a chest pain, let's send an alert to tee up a digital worker to go schedule that appointment. Now the appointment's on the books. And as we move closer and closer to virtual assistants, we can send that alert to a patient's phone, have them scheduled so they own it and they don't forget about it. It's just not someone scheduling for it. So self-management comes into play. So ability to see how your patients and the cohorts are moving through your entire health system allows you to strategically start thinking about different care pathways and how to get better outcomes. And we just haven't had that. Now we do. And it's very powerful. We need to start using the tools so we can put a dent not only to cost, but I talked to a chief medical officer last week. He said the average person during COVID gained between 10 and 40 pounds. That means our pre-diabetes rate is probably 1 to 3 right now. That's scary because we cut basically our resources by 30 to 40%. So who's going to care for all these people? So with automation, we can start to think about how we can push self-care management. It's really important.
Awesome. And actually, before we wrap for questions, you guys, I wanted to give Matt the opportunity to kind of discuss a very gracious workshop that we want to share with the audience here. We talked about the barriers, we talked about where to start, but chances are there's still individuals in the audience that kind of still want more of an in-depth kind of look at all of the different processes we've talked about with automation. And so obviously the panelist thinks the best opportunity to do that would be to provide a free process mining workshop. So Matt, can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what audience members could expect if they are, if they were to sign up for something like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So part of the nice thing about process mining is, like we talked, it's really quick to results. So this has really afforded us some great advantages to partnering with our clients and helping them achieve certain objectives. So a free process mining workshop is a great example. So with you, we can actually sit down within a couple of hours, actually map out a particular area that you're having problems with, and we can advise on how to get some data and actually show you exactly what your processes are. So using our process mining technology, we can actually map out one of your processes, walk through an analysis with you to identify where your opportunities for improvement are, where we can apply some automations and quantify that business value. So we're talking about barriers to entry. How do I get started? This is a very non-committal way, very kind of low-cost way for you all to get engaged, start exploring what the advantages are of implementing automation and process mining to help solve some of your business challenges. And it is really a low effort. I can't stress that enough. We have these use cases. We have opportunities where we can start with. We know where the data is. We just need some resources to sit down and have that conversation. So something we're very excited to be able to offer. And if you're interested, we've got some contact information down there that we'd love to get in touch with you.
All right, thanks, Matt. All right, and so with that, I want to make sure we have some, we leave some time for Q&A from the audience. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jose to provide us with some questions he's seeing from the audience.
That's excellent, Kenya. Great review by everyone. We had lots of questions coming in, so I'm glad you provided those emails and contact for follow-up because people can connect directly with you on that. There are strategic tactical questions. I'll start with more of a strategic one. In the last 12 months or more now, healthcare has undergone massive disruptions. So the patient journey has undergone massive disruption and it has been transformed in a lot of places. The question is not even about disruption, but dislocation, which is things that will never go back to how they used to be. Even if we have a 100% effective vaccine and COVID disappears tomorrow, these things changed and they will stay with us. Question from the audience is, what would be one of those two things that are, because of COVID, they will never go back. They will continue with us, and we should expect them to be part of the patient journey going forward.
Hi, this is Jeff. I was asked this question just the other day, and so I'll give the same answer. One of the things that we're experiencing is the advent and the expansion of the box healthcare store that's now attached to the CVS pharmacies, the Walgreens, the Targets, et cetera, which are providing many clinics and general patient care. And I think what you're starting to see and what you will continue to see is there's going to be a less likelihood of the ER being used for primary care as these organizations ramp up and continue to add functionality and delivery to themselves. I know that the quick cares here in Boston have been major centers for both COVID testing and now COVID vaccination. And we're seeing that also in the big box stores. I know that I got my vaccination from a CVS quick care from that standpoint. I did not go up to Marlborough General Hospital for mine. So I think you're going to see that transference. And I said this many years ago. These box stores are going to become community healthcare providers. There's going to be one on almost every corner, where there's a drugstore, there's a Target or a Walmart or something that is providing healthcare. So I think you're going to see the delivery of healthcare change, not just from a telemarketing or a telehealth standpoint, but also from a bricks and mortar standpoint of where you go to get your healthcare.
That's excellent. I will go for a more tactical question now because we have just a little bit of time and I want to finish with that tactical question now. the audience, especially in those organizations that honestly they're like overwhelmed right now, don't talk about technology, they're gonna fire you and everybody who looks like you, because they have lives to save and they're like overwhelmed with the day-to-day. It's hard to redesign this airplane while we're flying it. So the question is, I am having to start a little bit of breathing room in some areas where I'm considering technology. I don't even know what robotics process automation means. I mean, do you mean you're going to have some hardware robots around? We know it's not that, but that's the view of a lot of people still in healthcare. Question is, RPA and process mining are kind of foreign concepts to a lot of people in healthcare still. And if you're starting your journey, I mean, what would you tell them to kind of like stepping into this journey of digital transformation? Do you start with RPA? Do you start with process mining? I know this can be a long discussion, but if you can give me kind of a quick snippet on that.
Sure. So yeah, I can go first. I think the nice thing is we've got partners out here who work really well together. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's a joint value proposition. So we come in together, and this is kind of what I was talking about before, is we try and make this as easy as possible. Things like these free process mining workshops that have that conversation with you, figure out where your opportunities for improvement actually are. So it really begins with that conversation. I can't tell you specifically where your opportunities for improvement are, but with that conversation, we can arrive at an opportunity and actually show you using some of the data. And from that, is there opportunities to actually do automation with RPA? So it really starts with a conversation. I would say don't be scared. There's tremendous value out there. I think we've highlighted a dozen different use cases where we're seeing six-figure ROI out there that you can achieve very quickly. So it's low-hanging fruit that you can go tackle. So I would say, don't be afraid. Let's have a conversation, and we're going to be able to deliver value. I guarantee it.
Thank you very much. We have other questions. I'm going to ask the audience. Make sure you connect with the session that Kenya and the team has shared with us about process mining, and they will talk about RPA and other technologies in there as well. So please make sure you attend that session, learn more, and ask the experts directly about these questions. Kenya, Paul, Duff, and Matt, thank you so much for sharing your tremendous expertise on this incredible journey in healthcare transformation and technology.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Abby and Blue Prism on the patient journey innovation. Tremendous insights from experts on the technology, but also the organizational side, who understand what it takes to implement technology effectively and create value for all stakeholders, doctors, nurses, administrators, and patients all together on that patient journey that has been so significantly impacted by COVID. We are going to be taking a break now, and at the top of the hour, we're going to have the leaders from the Institute for Healthcare Excellence talking about one of the most prevalent issues and barriers for performance in healthcare. And it's not technology, and it is people. And the burnout that's going on in healthcare right now around the world already existed pre-COVID, and it has been intensified with the demands of COVID treatment and the emotional toll and everything that goes with that. So the Institute for Healthcare Excellence is going to talk to us about a culture to promote individual and team thriving, resilience, and peak performance, especially in times of uncertainty and rapid change like the ones we're facing right now in the healthcare industry globally. You do not want to miss that. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Thank you.